Okay, so I don't remember who chose this topic, but I am gonna start by sort of poo-pooing my title of environmentalism, only because the word environment literally means that which surrounds, right? And so the question obviously is, okay, what does it surround? Like what is the center of the environment? Um, and so in sort of the Catholic tradition, we we tend to use the word creation okay, um, instead of the environment, because environment makes it seem like things are just placed haphazardly throughout, right? Whereas creation draws in the fact that it's a whole. Okay, and so one of the things I want to do tonight um, is sort of talk about the underlying, um, maybe for lack of a better word, the underlying metaphysics that sort of drives environmentalism. Okay, and then we will talk about what the church has to contribute to that, and in fact, how it will be absolutely necessary for the church to contribute to it in order to actually begin talking about our relationship with creation, how we become stewards of creation, and so forth. And so one of the things we'll want to fight is that sort of fragmented view of creation that just makes it seem like things were just randomly, haphazardly placed here, which is sort of part and parcel with a sort of evolutionary Big Bang sort of way of looking at creation anyway. But again, ideas have consequences, and so that is one of the consequences of it. Okay, so to begin, what I want to do is I'm going to sort of the whole talk. I know you can't see this because it's one is blurry. You can see that's not bright enough. Is to essentially, I'm going to take this paragraph from the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, and I'm going to use it as my outline. So I'm going to split it in half. Okay, and that'll be sort of our launching point. So the first half of it says, nature, the work of God's creative action, is not a dangerous adversary. It is God who made all things, and with regard to each created reality, God saw that it was good. At the summit of this creation, which was very good, God placed man. Only man and woman among all creatures were made by God in his own image. Okay, so what I want to do is sort of build off of that. So to start with, I want to ask you, what makes a thing good?
Whether it leads you to heaven, whether it leads you to a deeper relationship with God.
Okay. All right. Absolutely. So when God looks at, for example, when he looks at the animals, and after he's done creating animals, he said it is good. What does he mean? Do the animals help us get to heaven?
There's no inherent evil.
Okay, so we can look at it morally, no inherent evil. What else? What makes maybe it'll be easier. What makes a chair good? Okay, so obviously that it has goodness infused into it and has being, God created it. Okay, it works. So that implies that a thing has a purpose, right? I mean, you're exactly right. So a good chair is one that fulfills its purpose. A good blanket is one that keeps you warm at night. And we would say, this blanket stinks because it has holes in it, right? So in other words, a good thing fulfills its purpose, right? And so when God says repeatedly during the act of creation, it is good, it is good, it is good, what he's really saying is that each thing that he created had a purpose, right? He made each thing for a specific purpose. And it doesn't necessarily only mean there is one purpose, but nevertheless, each thing has a purpose. And this, in a certain way, and to understand even this, is almost contrary to sort of modern philosophy, right? Modern philosophy says that actually there are no natures, there is no teleology, there's no no purpose in things. Things just are what they are, and we use them for whatever we can use them for.
That's rational.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
rational.
So, you know, we, human beings are like every other animal. And so therefore we can treat them like this. And so what we have to get sort of back to, first and foremost, is asking the question, what is whatever it is, what's its purpose, what's its intention, like what is it for? Okay. And if you see, like, when God creates, when he creates the sky on the second day, if you read it carefully, he never said it was good, right? Until the next day, when the sky's purpose is revealed, right? To hold the water below and above, to have this sort of separation between the waters above and the water below, right? And then he says, it is good. Okay. And so this goodness of a thing also is related to how it fits into the whole. Okay. And what its purpose is in the whole. All right. And so first question then would be, okay, well, why did God create anything? Why did God create anything? What was his?
He made us so we can know, love, and serve him.
Okay. And what did he make everything else for?
To serve us.
Okay. Serve us in what way though? For what purpose?
Sanctify us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, in a certain sense to sanctify us, but also remember we talked about this last time very briefly when we talked about how you know, there's sort of God made two books, right? Two books in which he reveals himself, nature and the Bible, right? And we said how even the Bible tells us how to read nature, right? And we talked about how you know, clouds have the purpose of, you know, storing rain and pouring rain down upon us, but also to show God's protection, right? And so God created whatever he created, he poured himself into. So everything that he exists, that he created, is to reveal him to us. Okay.
So we can give glory to him even more.
Yeah, even more. But in a certain sense, it also helps us to know him, right? You know, thinking about just, you know, a simple thing, right? Like the warmth of the sun is a sign of his providence in taking care of us, right? And the way clouds can protect us from the sun, another sort of sign of his way of. So it's the beginning of, and this is where, again, the Catholic sort of understanding of creation leads us to contemplate creation and not just look at it pragmatically, like what do I use this for? Okay. And so that piece is really important, but it's also very countercultural, right? And the reason is because we're sort of dominated by two other, again, I'll call them metaphysics, but just basically this way of looking at creation mechanistically, where it's sort of just the sum of all the parts of it. It's all just sort of, and then no relationship with each other, and no sort of awareness how each thing fits into the whole. And then the other piece of that, right? Errors always come in twos, right? So when somebody makes a mistake, and then if someone comes along and overcorrects, and the overcorrection is then to see sort of creation as all there is, right? And all in all. And so this idea of what you'll see, what we'll talk about, will be essentially a pantheism that kind of animates modern environmentalism. The first piece we'll talk a little bit more about today, which is that mechanistic sort of worldview. And then next time we'll talk about that way more when we talk about technology a little deeper. But what I want to do is then just sort of talk about these two, and then we'll talk about the middle ground of sort of what the Catholic understanding is. Okay, so let me define what I mean by this sort of mechanistic metaphysics. Again, I'll go to the Compendiums of Social Doctrine of the Church. Nature appears as an instrument in the hands of man, a reality that he must constantly manipulate, especially by means of technology. A reductionistic conception quickly spread. This reductionistic conception views the natural world in mechanistic terms and sees development in terms of consumerism. Primacy is given to doing and having rather than to being, and this causes serious forms of human alienation. Such attitudes do not arise from scientific and technological research, but from scientism, and we'll define these in a little bit, and technocratic ideologies that tend to condition such research. With the progress of science and technology, questions as to their meaning increase and give rise to an ever greater need to respect the transcendent dimension of the human person and creation itself.
Where is this from?
So this is from the Compendium to the Social Doctrine of the Church.
What year is that?
It was under John Paul II. I don't know exactly what year. Sometime probably the 90s. It was after the Catechism. So this mechanistic worldview just looks at reality as this complex machine. And all we have to do is submit its parts to the scientific method. And see how it works so that we can manipulate it and use it for how we need to use it. Okay, that's the important piece, right? So the problem is not studying to see how something works. The problem is to take something that God made so that you can master it, so that you can use it for however you see fit. Okay, so for example, to pick apart how a human is conceived, right? So that I can now conceive them in a lab, in a petri dish. And so now I can manipulate conception. Okay, that's the idea. All right, and then you could see where you do that with everything else, right? And so nature now becomes not a thing, or creation becomes not a thing that we find ourselves in relationship with. It's a thing that we have to master. All right, we become the masters of it rather than the stewards of it. It also fails to make sort of a distinction between things that we make and things that God made. Okay, things that we make, we can manipulate and suit them to our purposes. But things that God made have sort of their purposes built into them, baked into them. Okay. So under this paradigm, right, you would say a thing is good simply because it works for what I need it to work for, regardless of what its purpose is. All right. All right, any questions on at least the definition of it? And we'll talk about some examples and does everyone sort of know what scientism is? Can anyone define it?
Scientism is more of it's not the scientific process. Okay, it's the ideology of scientism, which actually has a preconceived ending where they're trying to essentially use evidence and theory in order to come to the conclusion that they want, and the conclusion that they want is essentially environmental atheism, opposed to then actually using honest scientific process. Because if they did use honest scientific process, then the end result would be that they discovered that in fact God doesn't exist.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is science, but more so like a religion.
It's bad science. Yeah.
Yes.
Scientism is bad science.
Yeah, you will see in this,
Dishonest science.
and this is where in both cases, in both of these sort of these two errors, they're both become religious in their worldview. And in this, certainly science becomes a religion in the sense that they have faith in some underlying principles that are untestable and also unreasonable. All right, so C.S. Lewis has a book called The Abolition of Man. How many of you have read The Abolition of Man? Anybody? Okay, so he's essentially dealing with this, okay? He's dealing with the idea of man's sort of domination of nature, okay? And it's a sort of response to the 17th century philosopher named Francis Bacon, who essentially, well, what he did was what all good heretics do, is he couched his ideas in terms that sound really Christian, but are in a lot of ways abhorrent.
Calvin.
Yes. So he essentially thought that, you know, the goal of science was to enrich human life by making new discoveries. Okay, we'd all sort of agree with that. But then he said that theology and philosophy no longer had any use. All right, so knowledge was power, and having the power to manipulate was all that you needed. All right, so here's what Lewis says, and I think he defines, this is his sort of definition of scientism, which I think is very helpful. For the wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality, and the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. Okay, so for the men of old, they would look at reality how it is, and they'd want to learn how reality was so that they could conform themselves to it, and so that they could use it to grow in virtue. All right, so that's sort of his men of old. And what he does is he essentially compares science with magic. So he says, for magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is a technique. All right. We would say that the solution is technology. Does anyone know what the word technology means? All right, so it has the word logos in it, which is knowledge, right? And it's knowledge. So techne just means to do something. So it's knowledge by doing something. Okay, not actually knowledge. How do we normally come by knowledge? By studying something, right? And by contemplating it. Technology, the idea is so anyway, so he's back to okay. And the reason why he compares it to magic is essentially magic, rather than sort of understanding reality, just wants to use some technique to dominate it, okay? Which is the same thing we sort of try to do with technology. So for magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is a technique, and both in the practice of this technique are ready to do things hitherto regarded as disgusting and impious, such as digging up and mutilating the dead. He had no idea what we were capable of. Man's conquest of nature turns out, and this is the sort of the hinge point, in the moment of its consummation to be nature's conquest of man. Every victory we seem to win has led us step by step to this conclusion. Okay, so in other words, the more and more we sort of fall into this trap of power and scientism, the less and less human we become. All right, and so in a certain sense, we become something less, even though we're trying to become something more.
With technology.
Yes.
Sorry,
Right.
so very well we went.
Yeah.
Environmentalism.
Yeah, well, so the point is, and this is what, if any of you have read Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, his chapter 3 is essentially about this. Is about the danger of applying technology to the environment because of what it ultimately turns us into. You know, and in his message there, at least, is for us to slow down so that we can morally evaluate what we're doing before we do it, right? So how we live now is the sort of technologically possible is the morally permissible. And what has happened is we have progressed way faster in our capabilities, and sort of our moral growth has not caught up, right? And this is another one of those dangers of the sort of the culture of specialists, right? Because specialists don't really care about the moral piece; they care about whether this is biologically whatever possible, right? Okay, so finally, this heresy of scientism is, as G.K. Chesterton says, the scientific heretic is moved to discuss details in art, politics, and literature, He may turn over and explore 1,000,000 objects, but he must not find that strange object, the universe. Everything matters except everything. Okay, what does he mean by this? Like, how many of you have read G.K. Chesterton? Yeah, really difficult to read, right? Because it's pretty clever. So you have to really think about what he's saying. But what he's saying here is this idea of looking at everything individually without seeing it as part of the whole, right? So he said, there's no universe, meaning one thing, right? The universe means there's one thing, right? Yes.
What is the difference between this and heresy of scientism and just, to me, it sounds like a blend between modernism and subjectivism.
Isn't this just paganism?
Well, I mean, it can lead to paganism. It tends not to, because it in the sense that, see, I think this essentially involves superstition, which the others do not.
Thank you.
If that answers your question.
The only reason I say this is because it reminds me of the line of, what is it, believe in nothing and everything's permissible or something like that? That idea of like what true paganism is.
Yes.
What we like.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it that way, I mean, it is a form of paganism. But that's the religious element to it, is that it in the end is superstitious in the sense that they just magically expect things to happen. Right. Okay. All right. So next time when we talk about I think the topic is like I think it's like technocracy and human transhumanism and AI. We'll talk way more about this. But I just want to sort of get us sort of thinking about, okay, how does this fit into the whole environmental movement? Is essentially, if I were to sort of summarize, it's this idea that man is at the center of everything, even above God, in the sense that God's plan for creation fits nowhere into this sort of view. All right. So it's all about power. It's all about being able to manipulate things so that we can become like gods. Okay, that's the sort of modern scientific or scientistic worldview is exactly that. Okay, so it again goes back to the fall and Satan's promise that you shall be like gods. Okay. All right, so let's sort of keep chugging, and I want to spend more time on the second piece. And so the link here is this sort of where the two errors are one. A correct understanding of the environment prevents the utilitarian reduction of nature to a mere object to be manipulated and exploited. Okay, so that's summarizing what we just talked about. At the same time, it must not absolutize, so this is the opposite error. Same time, it must not absolutize nature and place it above the dignity of the human person himself. In this latter case, one can go so far as to divinize nature or the earth, as can readily be seen in certain ecological movements that seek to gain an internationally guaranteed institutional status for their beliefs. Okay, so this idea, if we go from this sort of man overly center of creation to now the overcorrection is to now put man on the same level as every other creature, right? And so this is sort of like an ecocentric. If the first is an egocentric, the second is like this ecocentric that is sort of rooted in the romantic and transcendentalist movement of the 19th century. And what sort of happens is this is where it becomes very much a religious set of beliefs. And this is also where I think, especially if you go back to Pope Francis's encyclical, I think the church has totally overlooked this piece of environmentalism in the sense of seeing that it really is ultimately linked to the New Age movement. Well, they haven't said anything about it. Let's just put it that way. And I think this is probably the more damaging of the two, simply because of the damage it does, and simply just destroys man by treating him just like every other animal or creature or whatever. And so a lot of people, I mean, Thanos is a very believable character, right? Like, he just is. Like, you just, if you think about even just understanding, like, the whole like overpopulation push, like all of that started in like the late 60s, like every other bad idea. And then, Marvel introduces Thanos in their comics like 5 years later, right?
Well, the original, he did not do it for that reason.
Right.
The original was because he wanted to impress Lady
Yeah. Okay. So,
just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
That just sounds like tomato.
yeah,
Okay.
The original comic.
I didn't know you were a Marvel geek. That's
I'm
awesome.
a huge Marvel geek.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm actually more of a DC geek.
But nevertheless, there are people who would say he's not so much of a villain, right?
Actually, there's like a really big because I did environmental chemistry. There's like a really big nihilistic side to it, where they're like basically push this idea of like you should not have kids. You are doing a disservice to them. You're doing a disservice to you because you're putting them into a world that's going to die off anyway.
Voluntary.
Okay,
And-
so Megan, I want to come back to that.
Like
because-
it's like a form of nihilism.
Yeah, because I think we need to talk about that. So let's come back to it in a few minutes. Remind me when we talk about the overpopulation, because I think there's some I mean, it's more than just nihilism, I think.
And you should care because they teach that in high school.
Yes,
Yeah.
Because I'm teaching that unit right now.
pretty much everywhere. All right, so let's come back to that in like 10 minutes, because I want to talk about it. Okay, all right, all right. So Pope Benedict, he was kind of called the Green Pope, because he spent a lot of time talking about creation. But what he was sort of hoping to do, he was hoping to create this sort of human ecology, where he put man at the center of the environment, and then sort of showed how everything was made for man and what it meant to be a steward. And so that's going to be something we come back to in a few minutes when we talk about sort of the Catholic metaphysics here. Okay, so here's what he said. He said, on the other hand, a correct understanding of the relationship between man and the environment will not end by absolutizing nature or by considering it more important than the human person. If the Church's magisterium expresses grave misgivings about notions of the environment inspired by ecocentrism and biocentrism, it is because such notions eliminate the difference of identity and worth between the human person and other living things. In the name of a supposedly egalitarian vision of the dignity of all living creatures, such notions end up abolishing the distinctiveness and superior role of human beings. They also open the way to a new pantheism tinged with neo-paganism, which would see the source of man's salvation in nature alone, understood in purely naturalistic terms. All right, the second piece I want to come back to in a second, but what does it mean to say something has dignity?
That something is intrinsically valued, that is in fact valued by God.
Okay.
Where the human dignity is something that, I'm going to hate this phrase, but something that is an inalienable right. Okay. So you do in fact have this human dignity that you are owed by others because you remain in the image and likeness of God.
So do animals have dignity?
Yeah.
Okay. So how would we define the word dignity then? If humans have dignity and animals have
I
dignity.
suppose it would be something that God declared as good.
Okay.
Couldn't it just be like value though? Like it has value to God at least.
Okay, so how do we decide how much dignity a thing has then? I mean, that's short of putting our like somehow knowing what God thinks.
Well, okay. I mean, he kind of tells you at the very beginning.
Okay, so
Like,
You kind of know by the faculty said it was.
Okay, so Katie, keep going deeper with that, because I think you're,
so you have to be careful with that though, because not everyone has the same level of faculty. So like, I would be careful with that, because that's where people compare humans to certain things.
Well, I guess like on the whole, like the nature of a person does have an intellect. Specific people might have a.
Well, I guess that goes into the potential. They have the potential to
Yeah,
feel that intellect, even if they're unable to due to some circumstance, whether that be like from birth or not. So
Yeah,
I guess it's like the potential, the value comes from the potential to fulfill that which is God has designed it to fulfill.
It's very important you added that last part, because if you weren't, you were bordering on eugenics there.
okay, so this idea then, about, I mean, so how I would define dignity is it's the bridge between what a thing is and how we ought to treat that thing. Okay, so what a thing is and how we ought to treat that thing, right? And so, because men and women are made in the image of God, and not just, with God's imprint, they have a higher dignity than other things, right? So in a certain sense, you can rank dignity by how much being the thing has, or how much it images God. Right, so we would say, an animal, because it's capable of, I don't know, feeling or locomotion, has a higher dignity than a plant. Okay, so it's this idea, and so what you want to do is you want to treat those things according to what they are and what their purpose is, right? To Katie's point. Okay. All right, so here is, what I'm hoping to do, is a little bit is also to give you some good resources. So there are, I haven't really even talked about this yet, but so, I will say that, I believe in climate change. I believe the climate does change. I believe it's been changing from, the beginning. Well, I believe it started changing, after the flood. So, what I don't believe in is, climate catastrophes. Okay. So I will at least say that up front. I do think we have effects on the climate, because we are part of creation, and we are sort of the crown of creation, and so we do have effects, and we can have bad effects. But I'm not ready to call out the four horsemen of the apocalypse about it. And so it's a really good idea, because it has become a religion, to arm yourself with information about it, right? And so some of the people I'm going to recommend are sort of the people who take climate change seriously, but also do not fall prey to the total climate catastrophe. Michael Schellenberger, who I am quoting now, is one of them. And so in his book called Apocalypse Never, here's what he says. He says, environmentalism today is the dominant secular religion of the educated. Okay, and he's not a religious guy, by the way. Is the dominant secular religion of the educated upper middle class elite in most developed and many developing nations. It provides a new story. Okay, so it's meant to be, very deliberately, it's meant to be a replacement for Christianity. It provides a new story about our collective and individual purpose. It designates good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains, and it does so in the language of science, which it provides with legitimacy. On the other hand, environmentalism and its sister religion, vegetarianism, appear to be a radical break from the Judeo-Christian religious tradition. For starters, environmentalists themselves do not tend to be believers or strong believers in Judeo-Christianity. In particular, environmentalists reject the view that humans have or should have a dominion or control over Earth. On the other hand, apocalyptic environmentalism is a new kind of Judeo-Christian religion, one that has replaced God with nature. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, human problems stem from our failure to adjust ourselves to God. In the apocalyptic environmental tradition, human problems stem from our failure to adjust ourselves to nature. In some Judeo-Christian traditions, priests play the role of interpreting God's will or laws, including discerning right from wrong. In the apocalyptic environmentalist tradition, scientists play that role. Okay, so properly speaking, we have to see it as a religion. All right, and the purpose of it, right? Well, they have to create an apocalypse because you have to have something that you're fighting for and fighting against, right? They also want to create the Garden of Eden, right? That is very clear that that's their goal. So they want to return to some sort of pre-industrial. So the Industrial Revolution is their fall. And so they want to somehow get the earth back to that pristine time where, you know, most towns and cities, people were walking through sewage left and right. They want to return to that time with this pristine Garden of Eden and this utopia and this pre-industrial revolution. They're always fighting or having us fight against invisible enemies, right? Like radiation, CO2, all things you cannot see, so therefore way scarier. Or things that are really far away, like polar bears and the coral reef. Yes.
When you say you don't believe in the scientific side of it, is it that the claim that we put out where it's like, oh, if we don't change our ways and we don't reduce our CO2 emissions by 2035, the world's looking.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, okay. So those pieces, yes, I totally reject those. Like as a statistician, I totally reject those because it's bad. The models are bad.
Well, I don't want to speak for you, but I can imagine that you don't, like, it's like, not like you don't believe in the carbon stuff. Like, it's not like you don't acknowledge, like, so people think that make it as if you have to go hand in hand with the idea that warming the earth is like such a bad thing. And it's not, if you do it to an excess, anything you do in excess is not a good thing. But the earth is designed to kind of fix, like, it's got an intelligent design. Like it really does, and if you look at the like data of it from a long term, like it does actually have an intelligent design. Like when a volcano erupts, the whole earth cools. You know, like there's certain things that occur whenever this happens. And really if you really want to be worried about excess carbon going in, like carbon belongs in the atmosphere, it's really what they're trying to say is like, oh, we're burning too many fossil fuels. But really what it is like, the worry you should have is that why are we deforesting everything? And then also burning all these fuels. But like, this comes into a whole other practice and they make it something that it's like almost more traumatic than what it is. Like it is a concern you're supposed to have, but they make it into a doomsday idea, like, oh, the zombies are coming, not, oh, we need to be conscious of this. And I don't know, maybe not use bad and illegal practices when it comes to manufacturing. If you actually do it the right way, you don't have so many issues that people are creating. Like if you follow like what God has done, like with labor laws, like, you know, treating things as they should be treated in a Judeo-Christian way, you wouldn't have the issues we have now.
But then that's just like saying, hey, don't sin.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly what they get up, but that's what they're getting upset about, right? Is like, you're putting Christ into this and you're worrying about creation in this way instead of like falling into this trap. They want you to like fall into a doomsday panic. This is what's gonna happen. Really what it is like certain practices that just aren't Christian what's taking place. And that's where we're actually getting most of our issues from. Shocker, that Christianity could be a solution to this instead of a hindrance.
Yeah, and I mean, it ultimately comes down to, and we'll talk more about climate change at the end, but it comes down to just the hubris. And this is where the science, these sort of that go hand in hand, that we could possibly understand how the earth works. That, you know, and this is where like, you know, I always fall back on Thomas Aquinas, right? Like he talks about like the reason why God appointed angels to each of the things in creation was because mankind could never figure out how they work, right?
That's funny.
So you know, it's the hubris of thinking that we could possibly understand. So I think what I mean, if I were to, I probably rail against what I would call like an ideological environmentalism, rather than just sort of a practical, sort of like Megan's talking about, you know, like, hey, like, don't dump a whole bunch of crap in the rivers.
There's like hubris, like, oh, we're gonna
Right.
figure out that we're gonna go to catastrophe, and there's hubris, like, no matter what we do, we're not gonna mess up. the
Yeah.
mood.
Yeah, like, you have both ends of that spectrum, and like, from looking at it from an environmental perspective, like, yes, you have a role in it, but like, I'm gonna be honest with you, corporations lead to more issues than that, if you put in like, a lot of the things that like. Liberalism really is pushing, is actually also to leading to a lot of issues within it, so like. Again, like, if you go into the GK Chesterton of like distributism, returning things back to the local level, doing a lot of like the more Christian ways of looking at it. You have a healthier return to the environment essentially, and you're putting more value, like, we're realizing the value that we're inherently into that.
Did you say that corporations cause more problems than regulation?
No, that's not what I said. I said that, no. What I was saying is that corporations are causing more issues. So like essentially like your big name corporations.
Well, yeah, corporations will get just as bad as governments. It's just.
Yeah, like-
Whatever the
So
most
it's like
powerful
they're one
thing.
and the same.
Yeah, I was gonna say like essentially like. I think that they're like, and if you regulate in a certain way, you're also taking away value, kind of like something that we've talked a lot about of like from people instead of allowing them to see that value and push into it in the right way. Cause like. I don't know, like I have a lot of like feelings on this just from being an like going into an like a chemistry background and an environmental background with it, like. And then doing a law background with it as well, like the way that we really propose this is like so ideological that you have to like get people onto your religion in order to get them to follow this instead of like doing it more natural flow way. And so it gets really messy, which is why some people get into that interest, but like. The Earth's been around for a while, and like, again, like, I don't think God just didn't think about the fact that the like climate is going to change globally, that is very, very normal. Like, we went through a period of time where it was very cold, and then it slowly is heated up. And then there was a time whenever it like the climate changes naturally, that's a natural part of it existing, like it has that intelligent design to it. God didn't just think, oh, I'm not gonna create this thing called fossil fuels and think that they're not gonna eventually use it, like, there's an intelligent design to everything if you pay attention. And I think that people are kind of foolish to think that there is an intelligent design to reset.
Well, He also didn't, but it's not like you said that humans are like, I give humans nuclear. Chemistry, so they can create atom bombs, so we can do that. There are, like with Hubris.
No, there's limits.
You can destroy the earth if you want to.
I mean, that's
But
what
to say, like,
but like,
oh.
that's not, I'm not saying that we can't, but I think that it's like also too foolish to think like. I think it is foolish to think that there is not measurements in place though, that are naturally exist, that like we just simply existing are going to be, like, some people act like, unless you go fully off grid. And even if we go, like, there are people who genuinely exist who want human population to die off, like they're like, we have been, like, I have met them, they exist within the environmental world. They don't think you should have kids. And they want to sterilize, I mean, why do you think they're sterilizing certain groups of people? They're doing it on purpose. Like, it is a purposeful act that they're kind of.
All right, let's come back to that piece again in a few minutes. And what I want to do is grab this last sort of piece of just, okay, how are we supposed to look at creation properly? So that once we sort of get our Christian vision of nature, we can sort of self-correct first and then go out and sort of stop all of this insanity. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually use Pope Benedict, and what sort of some Catholic philosophers have come up with from him is what I'm going to call a metaphysics of gift. Okay, seeing creation as a gift. All right, the environment is God's gift to everyone, and in our use of it, we have a responsibility towards the poor, towards future generations, and towards humanity as a whole. When nature, including the human being, is viewed as the result of mere chance, okay, so this is a huge piece of this. A consequence of the evolutionary worldview is precisely what we're seeing. There is no reason to take care of the environment. So when nature, including the human being, is viewed as the result of a mere chance or evolutionary determinism, our sense of responsibility wanes. In nature, the believer recognizes the wonderful result of God's creative activity, which we may use responsibly to satisfy our legitimate needs, material or otherwise, while respecting the intrinsic balance of creation. If this vision is lost, we end up either considering nature an untouchable taboo, or on the contrary, abusing it. Neither attitude is consonant with the Christian version of nature as the fruit of God's creation. Okay, all right, so when I say creation is a gift, what does that make you guys think of?
Something you didn't earn, something you don't deserve, but you are granted it anyway, and so there's a certain amount of grace that comes with that.
Okay, all right, so something you didn't necessarily earn or create or, okay, what else? Yeah, so like made for us as an expression of love.
The word I keep thinking is unexpected. Like we didn't expect it.
Okay, yeah. So the unexpected nature of it, right? So this is where, we've talked about like, okay, what is the gospel, right? We talked about the first piece of the gospel is the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Right? This idea of creation as a gift is the answer to that question, right? Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, because God gifted it, right? In his goodness, he wanted to share his goodness, and he wanted to create creatures that could appreciate his goodness, right? And so we want to first grasp that it's a gift, right? And it's a gift, not in the sense of like a one-time thing, but it's in a sense, it keeps on giving, right? So in that way, like it's more of an analogy than anything else, right? And part of the gift, right, is that it has the giver in it, right? So the fact that things even exist and continue to exist, like God holds them in existence, right? And so what that fosters in us then is, if we start with that presupposition, is a spirit of wonder, right? Which is so totally missing in this world, right? Wonder, right? Wonder. You will treat creation like it's supposed to be treated if you learn to wonder, right? Rather than starting with doubt or skepticism, right? If you start with wonder, then everything else falls into place, right? If you approach a stream with wonder, you're much less likely to turn around and take a dump in it. Just being honest, right? Like,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, right? Like, why is it there? Why is it this way? Why did God make it this way? Why does it make that noise? Okay, so that's part of like, that's not,
All of it doesn't from us.
yeah, I'm not throwing my Birkenstocks on and like, I'm just saying that's how we should look at creation, right? I do not have Birkenstocks. I know that's probably surprises you, Megan. But so we have to be open to the sort of that creation is a mystery, right? And then you will use it with reverence. Okay, and it's not, I mean, to your point, right? Like if I sit there all day and think, oh, like I can't drink this water, I can't touch this water, I have to leave it totally pristine, then you're missing the point, right? Right, because it was also meant for our use, right? But in a proper way, right? So everything has its use, right? And so God has provided providence, and part of what he has provided is all of the things we need, right? And so I don't worry about us running out of resources, because that's not the purpose of creation. So that is the sort of idea of this sort of seeing creation as a gift.
Can I share something?
Yes, absolutely.
On that aspect that you said about like, it's not something to worry about. I think that these people are looking at things running out through a consumer's perspective.
Absolutely.
Because you can hunt, you can fish, like it's gonna be there. There is space, so.
And it is incredibly gratifying when that is the means in which you are providing for yourself. Like I think we've talked about this before, where every man every single man, it doesn't really matter how much money he makes or doesn't make, really wants to be a farmer. He does, he does, and it isn't because he enjoys sweating and wondering, gosh, I really hope it rains tomorrow. You know, it's not that, it's because of, well, we are working with creation.
Can you hear that loud thing? You can hear it in the recording.
Andrew, go be a farmer,
That's where he's at anyways.
but
He's got his overalls on and his pitchfork and,
you're kidding.
no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, like,
But it's true. It is something that we intrinsically have. And it is a very good thing. I just worry that, well, maybe we'll get into that later, but, when we take, maybe this might be a little bit of a leap, but when we take Cain's route, which we all have,
Is it what?
Cain's route,
Like-
not
like
Abel,
Cain.
yeah. Abel's route is everyone becomes a farmer, okay, and is able to provide for a family by working with creation and working in the fields, where Cain, where that is, Cain goes to Harry's Gate. Where I hate to say it, sounds a little bit cliche, but it is. Where mentally, and well, not just mentally, but spiritually as well, and well, physically. So I guess in the three realms, we particularly as males are greatly hindered by this. But
Yeah, and the reason why that is, right, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be farming. What we are craving
yeah,
is what we're craving is to be in touch with reality, right? Like reality as it actually is. And that's why in a certain sense, that's why skills become so important, right? Like practical skills. Especially when it comes to natural things that are so
Yeah.
important.
And I think something that is important with this, and what I say by being a farmer isn't that we go make our living, quote unquote, by being farmers, because American farming actually kind of ruined farming. Okay, where American ways in which we farm, the way we've treated farming is actually kind of ruined it, where we've treated it just like another industry. Another means in order to make money. No,
It is
that's
another
not
industry.
what we're referring to. All right, that's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about working with creation in a substantive kind of way, not just as another means to an end.
You mean-
There's a reason why I think that, farmers make a living by losing,
it helps.
it's because that's not the way farming is
Yeah.
supposed to be.
Yeah, I think it's Pope Benedict actually says that, like, farming is the ideal occupation. If for no other reason, you're totally dependent upon God, right? Totally dependent upon God.
I mean, like, if you really want to help the environment, return to a Catholic local community, like, return to the idea of working within your community, like, return to that, get out of like, I sound so crazy when I say it, but like, get out of going to your grocery store, go to the farmer's market, get out of it, like, break that cycle, because like what you're feeding is things that you don't know where your money is going to anymore, and I can tell you it's probably going to abortion. And then number two, I mean, what are
Well,
what
I don't
companies
know if I
gonna
want
do?
to buy eggs from the Wiccan moon worshiper at the.
I'm gonna tell you, most of the people at the farmer's market here are not that,
That's,
because I've been there, I've met these guys, these farmers.
Yeah, but
I'm just like also
I
like,
believe you.
like,
but
I mean, like,
it's my
my thing is,
experience that
like-
maybe other parts of the world are different, but in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area, all that. Or maybe North Carolina as a whole, because I see in Nashville too. The quote unquote crunchy community are two different people. One, you have the moon worshiping Wiccans, or the crunchy Catholic.
all right, well,
Those are your two.
I mean, like, it's
options.
more than just that, but I mean, like, have you been to the farmer's market? Have you met these farmers who work and do this?
Yes.
no, that's fair.
That's, yeah,
Like-
I don't deny that.
Like,
there
but
are
like,
good
I'm saying,
people
also
who-
go get some chickens then.
Yeah.
If you're gonna cry about it, like, go get some chickens, don't be pessimistic about it.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna slide ahead a couple of slides. And so second half has to do with, like, practically, what do we do here? So the Lord entrusted all of creation to man's responsibility, charging them to care for its harmony and development. The special bond with God explains the privileged position of the first human couple in the order of creation. Okay, so beginning to just understand, okay, what does it mean when God tells Adam to till or to cultivate the garden? Okay. All right, so first, some things we just sort of understand, well, at least theologically, will help us sort of set our understanding of creation, right? Following the destruction wrought by the flood, God's covenant with Noah and in him and all of humanity shows that God wants to maintain for the human community the blessing of fertility, the task of subduing creation, and the absolute dignity and inviolability of human life that had characterized the first creation. Okay, so understanding that creation fundamentally changed with the flood, but despite that, that God's desire remained the same. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, okay, what does it mean to then when I talk about respect for creation? All right, so Exodus 23, for 6 days you may do your work, but on the seventh day you must rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest. Okay, so how are we to understand that? Man is not to run roughshod over creation, right? Not to milk it for every ounce that it's worth, but be a faithful steward in order to maintain the sort of animal and plant utility for all mankind. What does it mean to be a steward? What is a steward? Like when we talk about being good stewards for creation, what is a steward and what does that mean to be a steward for creation? Protect and nurture. Okay.
Look after something until the original owner.
Yes. Yeah. So a steward is the one who takes care of something while the original owner is away, right? Again, having that mentality of realizing it's not ours, but was given to us. And so in a certain sense, understanding that when it was given to us, we were meant to cultivate it while maintaining a good way to sort of understand is I don't want to change creation so much that that God's image or imprint in each thing isn't indistinguishable. All right. And understanding the limits. All right, and this is where Pope Benedict talks about this idea of a moral ecology. All right, the pollution of the outward environment we are witnessing is only the mirror and consequences of the inward environment, to which we pay too little heed. I think that this is also the defect of the ecological movements. They crusade with an understandable and also legitimate passion against the pollution of the environment, whereas man's self-pollution of his soul continues to be treated as one of the rights of their freedom. Okay, so never going to fix the environment until we fix our internal environment is his point. There's a discrepancy here. We want to eliminate the measurable pollution, but we don't consider the pollution of man's soul and his creaturely form. He must acknowledge himself as a creature and realize that there will be a sort of inner purity to his creatureliness, spiritual ecology, if you will.
I have a question about.
Yes.
Rat singers. Right,
Well, the statements that have been made either by Francis or Ratzinger, and I know that GP2 had, well, you said something about GP2. It all seems to be through the lens that somehow mankind has done damage, or that there is that tinge of that what you call it earlier, the apocalyptic kind of in there, that if we don't do something right now, you know, that it seems that it may not affirm, but it kind of passively holds that the environmental alarmists' view is actually legit, and their approach may be. Am I reading too much into that?
yes and no. I mean, I hate to answer a question like that because that's not really an answer. Some of it stems from, I mean, we've talked about this before, right? Like the church has grown very weak at confronting science because they're afraid to be seen as foolish. Right? And so if 97% of scientists think that climate change is real.
Made up statistic, but okay.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Then they're going to they're not gonna go out on a limb. Right?
Okay.
But there's the no part is, well, they're also trying to sort of evangelize within the culture or the environment in which they're in, right? And so if that is the widely held view, well, are you going to be able to evangelize someone by challenging that?
But still wrong to think wrong.
Yes, that's what I mean. Like, so there's a piece of it where they assume it's a given. And they're like, okay, if this is a given, how do we respond to it? But I do think there's a total unwillingness to stand up against modern science.
Because like everything that we've talked about, it's part, okay, if you are, if you will, is the modern, I don't know, socialist communist movement as well. I mean, they are part of it.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that's where they all went when the,
all modern Catholic social teaching is taught through the lens of Marxism. There's no getting around that.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the piece that, yeah, anyway. Okay, I'm gonna keep sliding ahead a little bit, because there's two things I really want us to be able to talk about. All right, okay, let's first talk about, why don't we do this? Why don't we talk about the disorder of creation? Okay. When man turns his back on the creator's plan, he provokes a disorder which has inevitable repercussions on the rest of the created order. If man is not at peace with God, then earth itself cannot be at peace. Therefore, the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish, and also the beasts of the field and the birds of the air, and even the fish of the sea are taken away. Okay, so what is he talking about here? All right, so when Adam and Eve fell, what happened to creation? In what way?
Pain and violence.
Not necessarily, right? Like, I mean, animals like lions were still lions, right? Like they still fed on meat. So what changed in creation? Yeah, it's our relationship to it, right? Like, all of the animals in it were domesticated, right? They were not, they were not afraid of mankind, nor were they a threat to mankind. And things like, thorns and thistles emerged, right? So there is a fundamental disorder that makes it impossible to go back to Eden. All right, so we immediately have to reject any sort of like this idea that we could somehow bring this utopia to Earth. Okay, because that ship's already sailed. Yes.
I think I kind of have multiple questions.
Okay.
So is Eden like heaven or
No,
like, okay,
no. So Eden would have been like an earthly paradise.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, and everything that Adam and Eve needed was provided for them. But it was not their final, like, to go back to it makes no sense because that was not their final destination anyway.
So in Eden, like it was normal for there to be like a demand for like resources. Like animals had to eat each other,
Yes,
stuff like that.
yes. But there would have been no, in a certain sense, there would have been no need, like whatever would have been provided, right?
It's
in heaven would we demand things or,
No, because we no longer need them,
okay,
right? Was that, did you have another question? Is that-
so. So nature is not, it's corrupted because of our relationship with it, not because of the way it functions. Or like, did the way that nature functions change after the fall or?
No, well, I mean, yes and no, in the sense that, because we are sort of the center of it. Like anything, any part of it that like was in relation to us, which was all of it, changed. But maybe in the sense of like relation between animals would not have changed. Does that make sense?
No, you do explain.
Re-ask your question in a different, like, in the way,
I'm not sure how to re-ask it. So like with our relationship with animals, is it like? Wouldn't we be eating animals and eating or?
no, so that's one thing, so. Man was a vegetarian, like at the beginning. So,
Wait, then how was the argument that God created them was supposed to be?
no, so the idea that he created, well, so in Genesis 9, somewhere in chapter 9, I think it's like 9:3, God then gives Noah the command to eat animals. Because we were so weakened by the fall that they essentially needed it. So originally Adam and Eve did not eat animals. And they didn't use them like in the sense of for clothing at first either, right?
Oh. But. Is that how our relationship changed with animals?
I mean, in some ways, that's one of the ways, like, yeah.
I guess it would.
So in a certain, like, we are, I guess in that way, like, vegetarians are right, like.
Yeah, I get
Uh,
that saying.
Well, but no, but that's also like, that's also why did you ever wonder why we fast from meat?
True.
It's because meat was given to us as a condensation sort of, or compensation for the fact that we are fallen. So now that we've been redeemed and original sin no longer reigns over us, we fast from meat. That's why we fast from meat. It's kind of a random thing, right? Like why would we pick that, right? That's why. What were you gonna say, Colin?
Part of what I have answered in this question is no animal nature spell. You don't see.
Right.
We have members that are struggling with being.
Yeah.
And still see this.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're sort of relations with each other and with themselves, and that way did not change. So they still were gonna die. Like,
What about animal sickness?
they still would have been sick and die, like all of that, right? That's a function of not of, that's a function of just being a material thing, right? Like, material things don't last forever. And the only reason why Adam and Eve, that was a preternatural gift that God gave them, that they wouldn't die. In our natural condition, we die because we're material beings. Yes,
So would natural disasters be a consequence of the fall as well?
I believe so. At least not in the sense of, in the sense of the damage they do to like human beings, yes. Right, so were there things like windstorms or something like that? I mean, I think if you read to the other piece, right? Which if you read carefully again, Genesis, you'll realize why people thought Noah was such a whack job was because it had never rained before. Right, and so in a certain sense, the atmosphere and everything of the earth was totally different before the flood, right? Yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay, so understanding like, we can't necessarily redeem creation, and we can't go back to Eden is like an important piece.
Take that, vegans.
Yeah. But I guess they're right about the vegetarian thing.
I actually have another question.
Yes.
So. I'd like. Again, I don't know how to fully articulate it, so just bear with me, but, so. I'm still kind of confused about, like. So nature falling. Like, if I say something. Like, nature is good. but nature is fallen, then someone could say nature's not good because it's corrupted in the same way that humans are. So like what actually like so are humans evil and inclined for good, or are we good and inclined for evil?
That latter,
one.
yes,
But we're good and inclined for evil.
Yes.
Concupiscence.
So is that just like, is that only possible with consciousness, or does nature adhere like to the same thing, or?
yeah, so think of, again, go back to like the purposes, right? So the purpose of all of the rest of creation was we were supposed to be over it, masters of it, running it, right? And when we fell, we lost that, right? And so now it's run by instinct or the devil or something else other than us, right? And so that when you say like creation is fallen, that's essentially what you mean is the effect of us fallen, whatever changed as us being, this is what I meant earlier, maybe this will help explain it. In whatever ways we were masters over it, no longer. And so whatever changes that sort of brought about, were brought about. But in other ways, like lions are still lions, still do lion things. They're not struggling, with, their fallenness. And, in that way, there's no difference. So it's us as masters, right? So in other words, lions change, like I can't yell at a lion to come here and sit on my lap. Like Adam could have.
Oh.
Right, and so that's, that's a change, but it's just, it has a different sort of a, think about like, the lions now have a new master or something.
So the devil doesn't. So the devil didn't corrupt nature like in itself, like.
No, but he does gain control over it though,
Oh,
right?
I mean, demons gonna turn to him. That's why you need to bless your cat. That's why that's a thing.
Yeah, so he can control them, right? Because we gave up our stewardship and gave up our mastering of it,
okay.
right? Before that, he wouldn't have been able to unless somehow God permitted, right?
I was always under the impression that like nature functioned like in a way to where animals like, there wasn't like a demand to like, for animals to eat each other or something. I mean.
No, I think that was still there. I think all that was
Okay.
still there.
Is it implied that it won't be that way in heaven, or?
Yes, it actually is in scripture. I think it's in Isaiah, like the lion and the lamb will lay down together. So the lion will try to eat the lamb.
Okay. Good.
Assuming that, there's animals in heaven. I won't go into that. Okay, so what I want to do is like the last amount of time, we brought up two sort of questions that I want to dive a little bit into just to sort of talk about. And the first is really related to this just nihilistic sort of way of looking at having children, because it's taught to young people, especially now, that humans do untold harm to the environment. It is evil to bring them into it. So what I want to do is at least start with the sort of myth of overpopulation, that's where it comes from, how it's not true, and sort of how to so it comes from 18th century, I guess he's really a preacher, but he was a mathematician named Thomas Malthus, who basically said we were going to run out of resources in 50 years. So this is like 1780s. He was clearly wrong. Unfortunately, like most sort of like doomsday enthusiasts, they just keep pushing the time out, right? And so you have to actually talk about the issue, right? And so as I mentioned earlier, there's the population bomb. Paul Ulrich in the 1960s, who's actually still alive, said that by 1980 the world would totally collapse. He was totally wrong. Okay. So what is the error in all of this? Well, first of all, like there's a commandment to be fruitful and multiply. So we know we have a truth, right? We have a truth on which to base that, right?
God's nothing to contradict.
Yeah. So in truth, what happens when there's more people on the earth?
More carbon dioxide.
Well, maybe slightly. What happens when there's more people? There's who said it? Somebody said more flourishing. Yeah, I mean, it's proof, right? We'll go back to the cut point of the Industrial Revolution, right? Population has, I think, tripled, if not quadrupled.
There's more leisure time, and so people
Uh,
were.
and so where did all of that come? What it
That too.
really comes down to, right? Well, first of all, in 1800, 90% of the world lived in poverty.
Yep.
You know what percent in 2020 live in poverty? Less than 10.
10.
Less than 10, right? Total, like, this is where, yes.
This is real. Is it like?
Yeah, so part of this, like, this nihilism makes zero sense.
What's
Because-
considered poverty?
Like destitution, not having food.
Like destitute.
Yeah.
Are you taking like?
Well, relative poverty is always gonna exist.
Yeah, I the
Relative-
US don't look at that necessarily.
Yeah, relative poverty will always exist. That's
Oh,
just
sure,
the
yeah.
function of it, right?
Are they taking certain parts of statistics and just like essentially skewing it so that it fits?
Just
their-
the world population, 90% in 1800 lived like literally less than hand to mouth. 10%, less than 10% live that way now. And that bears out.
Yeah.
Do any of you know anyone who's starving?
No, of course. not.
200 years ago, you would have known plenty of people that were starving. Okay. The thing is, like, we live in a time where the world could not be any better. Like, I'll just be honest with, like, this nihilism. I mean, we have everything we need readily in front of us, right? Like, total, like, a time of complete abundance, right? And to try to sort of say, like, the world is overpopulated during a time of, like, unprecedented human flourishing makes zero sense, right? 0 sense unless you have an ideological axe to grind.
Well, the irony, they wanted to return pre-industrial revolution.
Right, and that's like I said, if you want to go back to like walking through sewage as you leave your house, being careful walking down the street that somebody doesn't open their window and throw their chamber pot on you. Like, go ahead, live like that. That's not the world we live in, right? And so this nihilism makes 0 sense, right? It makes 0 sense because human beings have the capacity to create, right? Like economically, a person creates far more than they consume, far more than they consume in their lifetime. It's not even close, right? Like this zero-sum game fallacy of the way people look at the world. You know how many times they've said we're going to run out of fossil fuels.
So many.
And now they're like, yeah, there's probably about that we know of, you know, at least 250 or 300 years worth of fossil fuels that we know of. Right? Not gonna run out anytime soon. Right? Our capacity to create and innovate, right? Like, you know, the example always is, you know, like a piano has what, 80, how many keys? 87 keys, 89 keys or whatever. Like, how many songs can you play on a piano? It's practically infinite, right? Because that's what human beings do. And so this guilt that they're embedding in these kids' minds about the environment, like we have to just like, we have to be honest and just say like, the world could not be like materially any better, right? It cannot be like, it's never been this way in the history of mankind. Now we could lose that, and I'm not saying we're in a good spiritual place, but the nihilism of I don't want to bring any more people into this world as if it's a horrible place is just false, right? It's just totally false, whatever your worldview is, right? I mean, our worldview is clear, like you bring children into the world because you're making them into saints, so you can populate heaven. But the point is, like, it's false from every perspective in which you look at it, and it's anti-humanistic, and literally like hate people,
Yep.
right? They hate people. Yes, Connor.
So why do you think so many? Because we say, well, you know, really good people who are, sorry, at least I know my own example, I know at least one person, probably multiple people who believe it's a bad thing to bring up with them. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that too. I guess no one, but there's somebody. And I feel like there are, we probably all have seen somebody on the line say, oh, well, is that good going with? Why do you think it's such a common thing?
Okay, I mean, I think it's in like literally ingrained in people's minds, right? Like, I think it's propaganda. I had a conversation with someone just the other day. I was like, and they said like the same thing, like we stopped having children because I could not bring children into the world. And I asked them, I'm like, what's so bad? And basically all they could come up with was that the liberals ran everything. And I was like, seriously, like that's the best, like they tried all the little like,
Bring more.
yeah, I was, but that was their best shot at it, right? Was like, oh, the liberals run and ruin everything. I'm like, really? Like, okay. Like, can you not adapt to that? Can you not adjust to that? Like, but I think it's like nobody questions it. And it's just, they're like, okay, like, yeah, you're right. Like, it's so bad. So like the minute, especially because it's like, it seems to be you guys' generation too, that's really fallen for this. Like, you hear someone say it, ask them what's so bad. Ask them what's so bad. Ask them,
People are like,
well, of course not, like, because
like, yeah.
what's marriage for in the end, right? Like,
Well, I
yeah,
mean, people think that like
It's
my
kinda
students
scary,
think
yeah.
Alexis and I are married because we're engaged. Like, you
Yeah.
have to like, I got to teach this today and I asked my kids, like, why are you frightened of overpopulation? And my 15-year-old responded with, I mean, like, it feels like it's something that could happen. And I was like, okay, why do you feel like it's something that could happen? And I always love like the response I get. And they were basically like, it doesn't necessarily happen here, but like, there's other people who don't have the things I have. And I said, is it so bad? Cause like, I was like, do you really think that it is so bad not to have a ton of material things? Was like, basically, like, I can't say too much because I can't get into religion questions because I work in the public school system. But I was like, are you comparing this to yourself? Because I was like, if you are, we definitely live in a society of overconsumption and materialism. And if you're doing that one-to-one, yeah, we might have an issue because you think that you need to have like Louis Vuitton belts and you're 15. But like, I like had this conversation. I was like, like just because of this, and I was like, yes, and there is areas where there are concerns for things, but like, that's why certain things exist, and like that doesn't mean the whole world is starving out.
yeah,
That's one area.
don't bail people out like that though. Don't make them tell you where it's so bad. Like, just say, we'll talk about this later. You go research and tell me where it's so bad.
They brought up Yemen.
Yemen?
Yemen?
Okay.
That was like,
Failed state.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a failed state that was starved out by people, but they kept bringing that up, and I was like,
Even man-made.
And is that because of is that because there's not enough food or
and
because
that
of
was the conversation
dictators?
that's kind of the conversation that's ended up going back. Period.
Yeah,
It's
so-
like
Not the
7:30
first
in the morning
period.
and I'm having this conversation.
Yeah,
and
you
I'm
just
like,
have to challenge, like when
we're-
people,
I don't think I think they now hate the government, but basically I was like, if you pay attention, I was like, most of the time, like the potato famine for the Irish people was not because there wasn't actually like, it's because they were like literally shipping everything out. I was like, your government's more likely to kill you than the ground.
Can I be honest though? Hear me out.
I'm always worried when someone says, can I be honest? Does that mean you weren't being honest earlier?
People that don't wanna have kids because they're nihilistic, I'm okay with them not having kids. Like, no,
Well, but- Okay, go ahead, finish. I'll hear you out. You asked me to hear you out. Yeah.
You're not
Yeah.
Today, I walk to work and I always see mothers like mothering their children. It's so frustrating. There was a baby today, it was crying, like it had a cry of pain. The mother is just trying to put a pacifier on it, it's on a stroller. I'm like, no, like pick up the baby, like do something, Huh?
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
No,
they do that a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they do cry like there's
it freaks you out. too.
yeah, like they're dying every single time. And you know what? They're not.
It freaks you out though.
Yeah.
You're not wrong that parent, that there are plenty of parents who don't. That,
Yeah.
you're
Yes.
not wrong in that.
But anyway, so anyway, I think these people, like, I don't know.
So there is also Chesterton's response to the overpopulation. The answer to anyone who talks about the surplus population is to ask him whether he is part of the surplus population or not, and if not, how he knows that he's not. Which is always the best way to handle it. All right, so
What book is this from?
that is from Orthodoxy, I believe. All right, so global warming.
Man, very great.
Okay, so diving into, I mean, you did say earlier, Brendan, about Pope Benedict, John Paul II, and how they sort of, and Pope Francis, how they sort of seem to be definitely leaning towards climate alarmists. I find this to be one of the most balanced statements of the church. It is by the USCCB. As Catholic bishops, we make no independent judgment on the plausibility of global warming. That's a good start. Rather, we accept the consensus findings, of so many scientists and the conclusions of the IPCC as a basis for continued research and prudent action. Scientists engaged in this research consistently acknowledge the difficulties of accurate measurement and forecasting. They may acknowledge it, but they never admit it. Responsible scientific research is always careful to recognize uncertainty and is modest in its claims. Okay, so they're saying this completely, totally tongue-in-cheek, by the way. This is the exact opposite of what they did. The climate scientists. Yeah. Yet over the past few decades, the evidence of global climate change and the emergent scientific consensus about the human impact on this process have led many governments to reach the conclusion that they need to invest time, money, and political will to address the problem through collective international action. The virtue of prudence is paramount in addressing climate change. All right. So
They didn't say anything.
that's a word.
That's
a word?
USCCB in a nutshell. They just said nothing with a big paragraph. Sorry.
Yes. No, it is, but what I think is fair is I do think they're saying things tongue in cheek. But I also think the virtue of prudence is actually the best advice you could give. All right. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to weed through the garbage. Okay. And figure out what's true and what's not. Okay. Because there's an ideology underneath it that has taken over, and it's an anti-human ideology. And if we don't do something, it's going to take over, because the next generation has been taught that this is a given. Okay.
Yeah, but now the church also,
Um,
or I can't say the church does. I can say that, like, for example, I would not be really surprised if